I tried to be a rock star. I realized that I like eating, and that career was not going to work out. I found myself literally on operating tables trying to stay alive. Playing music was a sort of perfect trap for me because
Hello, everyone, and I'm just so glad that you've joined for this episode of the What You're About podcast with me, Chad Abood. This is where we break down with inspiring leaders and entrepreneurs how they've uncovered their natural gifts and had the courage to use them to pursue incredible career success and happiness. And I wanted to do this podcast because I know how difficult it is when you feel the pressure to play safe. There's expectations on you. I've felt it in my own life, personally and professionally. And so it is exactly what I care about the most in my business and my life, to help people find the greatness that's within them, find that clarity and confidence in it so that they can use it towards the goals that mean the most to them. And so I'm just really, really pumped and honored that we have Owen McGrann here with us. Owen, appreciate you from being here, man. Listen, Owen's done so many different things. I want to kind of give him the plaudits that he deserves here. So listen, Owen has a big history with, what we call big law in the legal services industry, working, really high pressure legal cases, but he also is an entrepreneur. He's an incredible writer. If you're not already subscribed to On the Record, highly recommend. This is my weekend morning coffee reading. He's a musician. The guy is probably quadruple threat, but also he's a wonderful human being. I've gotten to know him the last couple of years, and I just want to say, Owen, appreciate you so much for everything that you've contributed to my journey too, man.
hey, thank you so much for having me. You are too kind in your intro, but I'll take it.
No, you take it, my friend. So listen, I want to get into it because we're going to cover the ground of the career, the early career, the later career, the entrepreneurial stuff. I'm going to make sure we get something in about the music and On the Record because, it just feel like it's part of my weekend. So, we're going to get through it all. But so let's just dive into it then. When I think about you and what I know about you from the journey that you share on LinkedIn, I'm really curious because I see kind of the last couple of years. And you give us some reflections upon life, especially in On the Record, but I don't know you, the Owen from the earlier days. And so can you take us back a little bit? Like, what was going on when you were thinking early career goals, ideas that you hoped for? Like, what was going on in you?
Yeah, so I grew up with the intention to not be a lawyer, right? My dad was a big law attorney. I saw the way that he worked. Um, it didn't look like it was a great time to me. Um, so I went to college and I majored in English and philosophy, and then I went to graduate school, got a master's in English, and realized that the career path for that was not great. And I stepped back and I sort of looked at the Venn diagram, the things that I'm good at and the things that people would pay me to do. And there's a tiny sliver there in the middle, and law, it fit in to that little sliver in the middle of the Venn diagram. So I sort of gave in and went to law school.
But let me ask you there, because you've got this anti-career goal. You're saying like you didn't even have, it
Yeah,
wasn't, I want to do this. It was the anti-goal. You're like
that's
Taylor
right.
Swift with the anti-hero. You had the
That's
anti-goal, and then you're seeing the overlap and you're like, okay, now I'm going to go do it. Like, was there an internal struggle there, or did it just seem like, kind of the reality that you were facing, or had you made peace with it by then?
yeah. I mean, there was a period where after graduate school, there was a year between that and when I went to law school, and I worked for a nonprofit. I tried to be a rock star. I realized that I like eating, and that career was not going to work out. And so, it was a fairly calculated decision where, I was 25 at that point, and I thought, okay, I need to adult. And honestly, it was something that I knew because my dad had
Mm-hmm.
done it. It was something that at least to some extent I had a comfort level with as far as what to expect and what kind of career paths there were. I was wrong that I understood what it was, but I thought that I did at the time, right? Um, And then, once I got to law school and started my career, I had the same kind of thoughts that most young people do when they get into it, which is, great, I'm going to work on huge cases. I'm going to be, a big, powerful lawyer, and I'm going to make a lot of money. It's going to be great.
You're watching Suits and you're like,
I,
that's it.
that's right. The only accurate part about Suits is how often the lawyers are eating street food.
I put on so much weight, man, in those early years.
Oh
I
man,
probably
I
put on
know,
like 30 pounds with the amount
I
of
know,
eating I was doing.
I know. Because suddenly it was 11 p.m. and you're like, oh shit, I need to eat something, right? And then you
Totally.
you don't eat well, and it all just sits on you. It's not a healthy it's not a healthy path in all kinds of different ways.
So I'm curious,
So
man. Like you're such a creative guy. You're like a music guy. You're like, all right, I got to make peace with this. I know this life. As you started getting into it, law school, the earliest kind of career days, like how was it settling in you? Like you're a guy who's used to eating ramen and playing the shows, and now you're
yeah,
like moving towards this Suits life. And how was it settling in you?
yeah. I mean, it was in a certain sense, playing music, doing that kind of stuff, was a sort of perfect trap for me, because I got used to doing things that I didn't particularly like. Going around in a van all the time
Ah,
is not fun. I got used to performing and doing things over and over again that to everybody else seemed really interesting and fun and entertaining. To me, it was playing the same song for the thousandth time.
ah.
Um, and so you learn to sort of feign the excitement, right? And I mean, I have to say that did me very well when I got into both law school and then becoming a lawyer, because I mean, the thing that a lot of people, before they get into the situation of working as an associate at a firm, don't realize is it's a lot of rote,
Right,
boring,
right,
stuff that you just kind of have to plow through.
right,
And you know, when you're in that position and you're supposed to be having the time of your life because you're this big associate at a big law firm, and you're supposed to look excited when you show up in the office at 8 o'clock in
right,
the morning on Sunday.
right.
um you know it taught me to wear a mask that sort of got me through those first couple of years in big law, but it probably didn't do me a whole lot of favors.
You actually had the skill. Like you'd learned the skill of I can do this brief 1,000 times
Mhm.
and make the audience feel like I'm loving it and I'm breaking
That's
my
right.
guitar on stage because that's what you had been doing this whole time. That's cool, man. I always thought about that when I watched like documentaries about bands and musicians. And I'm thinking to myself, like, do they love playing that song? And maybe for some people, it depends if there's like 6 people or 60,000 people, and depends how many zeros at the end of the event paycheck. I don't know, but I always
Mm.
wondered that. So it's I love that you shared that.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, some nights it's amazing, right? And some nights it's like, if I have to play the song one more time, right? And and you start, part of the reason that bands go crazy, right, is because one night when you're playing that same song for the eighth time that week on stage, you just start playing it differently, and everybody else is trying to figure out what the hell
Right,
is going on,
right,
right? Because you're bored and you're trying to breathe some life into it, right? I knew that I was
right,
in
right.
trouble practicing law when I was working on a brief, and I opened it by doing a parody of the beginning of Kafka's The Trial, right?
That's amazing.
And it was simply because I was bored out of my mind, right? And I gave it to the
You're like, is
to the
anyone going to
partner,
read this? Is anyone going
right?
to notice that I'm doing this?
Right. I gave it to the partner, and he said nothing about it. And I was like,
Oh, that's
all right,
amazing.
well, I guess we're going to file this. Um, and it was only at the end when when, he said, by the way, what's with this opening? It's really odd. And I was like, he's never read it. Okay. And it was a lesson in, I was surrounded by a bunch of smart people, but not necessarily cultured people.
So let's take that now. So okay, so you have the history with music, pros and cons. It's a creative outlet, but you learned how to do things in a routine way. You deployed that kind of training to the law, which actually was helpful, again in a good way and a bad way. But that creative piece hasn't left you. The writing, the humor, the thoughtfulness. combining it with like other artifacts of things you've read in your life. Like, it's so funny to hear that you did that so early in your career, because it makes so much sense based on what I see you do over the last 2 years. So you had this thing, and did you? I mean, first of all, I tell you all the time that your writing is a beautiful gift. Do you feel like that is one of your natural gifts? Clearly, you're a thoughtful guy. You're an inquisitive guy. Like, what do you feel like are the natural gifts, and when did you start noticing them? Like, were you a kid? Were you a teen in the van? Like, when did this come to your head?
Yeah, I mean, I noticed pretty early in my life because um, I was I was never good at school, right? Not because I wasn't learning things, not because I wasn't good at picking up on things, but I got bored really easily. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that I have ADHD, right? And I, the littlest glint of a shiny object has me running for it. But you know the things that I found that I enjoyed doing were the things in my professional life that people either really loved or really hated.
Oh, okay.
And the people who tended to really hate it were the people who wanted to do things the traditional way, or to do it the same way every time, or there is a house style and we have to stick with it. And I wanted to entertain myself because I got bored easily, right? And so, if people were willing to go on a ride with me, they loved it. If it made them think harder about what they were reading, they didn't. Now, judges tended to like it, clerks tended to like it, partners did not.
When it's kind of
Um,
funny, because if you think about who your audience is, it actually played really well to the audience. But
right.
there's kind of a convention around how that work is done. And there's almost
Right.
like a gatekeeper that is like misconstruing where the path should go, even though
Yeah.
the audience would appreciate it. Did you see that? And was that frustrating to you? Like, when did you
Yeah.
start getting the rub between, like, I'm a creative guy, I like to think out of the box, I like to push it a little bit, and maybe I'm not afraid to do that, but I've got this very conventional job that pays me a lot of money and probably satisfied a lot of external validation?
Yeah. The time I remember first being angry about it, maybe not angry, really frustrated about it, was I was working on a brief for a judge that I clerked for, right? Who I know very well, who married me, not married me, but was the officiant at the wedding.
Good
Um,
qualifier.
and I mean, if he asked me to marry him, I would marry him. But you know, I knew that the way that I was writing the brief was going to land with him. I know him very well. I know the way he thinks, and the partner I was working with on the matter just kept saying no.
Mm,
Um, and eventually I acquiesced because, he was my boss. And we were
right.
not successful on the MSJ, and I was blamed for it. Right now, Chad, I'm very, very good at owning my own mistakes. I am not good at owning other people's mistakes that are forced on me. Um, I should
How
probably
does that
have
come
a
out?
little bit. Um, I mean, when the partner came to me and said, you messed this up, I just I just went right back at him. I didn't have
Wow.
a whole lot of tact. I was 3 years out of law school.
Wow.
Uh, yeah. And this was I think he was the chair of the litigation department at the firm I was with. So
Wow.
I don't always know what's in my own best interest, right? And um, what it really comes down to is I realize now that I was a terrible employee. I was just bad. I didn't
Mm.
do what I was asked. Um, you know, when I knew it was going to end poorly, I threw a fit. Um, that was probably not my place to do, but it was working for somebody else never ended well for me. And I am now mature enough to understand that a lot of that was my fault.
It's so, I love that you tapped into that, because before we started on, we were talking about the point of this podcast. And listen, for anybody that like has ever read or listened to anything that I've babbled on about, we know that like I care so much about people finding their own way, their
Mhm.
own gift. Like it's not, I don't want anyone to feel like they need to live someone else's life or they need to take advice, like some universal truth. Everyone's got their own way. And it's funny when you said that, like, you know, you didn't handle things the right way. And I think to myself, I'm like, well, the Owen that I know today seems like ambitious, community minded, positive, motivated, like so comfortable in your own skin. And I know it was a big journey to get there. And I want to touch on that with you briefly, but maybe it was the right way, because if you had done it the way you were meant to do it, like we wouldn't have the greatness that we have from you now. And so I just wanted to share that back with you, man, because it
Yeah, I
would be a
appreciate
sad
that.
thing, I think, if we didn't have the Owen of today.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I agree with you. I just look back and I realize that I made people's lives a little problematic for a while there, right? And um,
Yeah.
some of it they deserved, and some of it probably not.
Fair enough, man. Fair enough. So, okay, so let's shift then. So, you're struggling with this challenge of you've got gifts, you're creative, you're funny, you're pushing it, it's not being allowed. You're even realizing that while it's still you and you're being you,
Mhm.
you're not in the right fit environment, because the environment matters as much as our own personal gifts. Like, you know, you're a creative
100%.
guy, but if we're not deploying our gifts where they're wanted, then you have a bad match. And so when you're facing this challenge or this doubt, like how did you find your way through the forest on that one?
Yeah, I wish I could take more credit for how I got to where I am than I actually am able to. You know, I mentioned earlier, I had a sort of maladaption where I could fake it really well and I could do the work really well and I could keep plowing through it. And what that did was it took me from, I started at a mid-sized Pittsburgh firm, 120 lawyers, and I kept getting bigger until I was at, a firm with 2,000 some lawyers. And in that process, it got to the point where I was quite literally dying.
Yeah.
Um, and so part of my journey was I got so ill that I had to stop practicing law.
Wow.
And so part of what happened wasn't, me having the light bulb turn on and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this and maybe you should do it another way. Right. Which
Right.
I would like to be able to take the credit for that, but I'm not that perspicacious. What happened was I found myself literally on operating tables trying to stay alive. And then at the back end of that, when when my wife, who had been supporting us for 2 years, 2.5 years, came to me and said, "Hey, Owen, I think that you're healthy enough. Could you please start making some money again?" Um, and I said, "You're right. You've been far more understanding about this whole situation than I probably had any right to expect." The thought of going back to a firm and doing the kind of work that I had been doing in that kind of environment, I just couldn't even fathom it. Right? I mean,
Right.
it made my heart race just thinking about it. And so there was a moment of, okay, well, what the hell do I do now? Right? Well, what am I good for if not, working for a firm, billing a lot of hours and making other people money?
Well, because that had been built, like that's drilled into a lot of professional service
Right.
folks, lawyers for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, the way that it works when you're at those firms, you begin to associate your own self worth with the amount of hours that you bill.
Right.
Right. To the point where, I remember taking my dog for a walk and thinking, huh, that was a point three. That was an expensive walk. And it's like, no,
You bill
I
your
was
dog.
right. It was like I took my dog for a walk. That is supposed to be a joyous, like no strings attached kind of thing where I get to do the things that
Right.
I want. And I was immediately thinking I could have been making money there. It sort of poisons the way you start. It's why people are, even though they have good intentions, they'll miss the recital or they'll miss the soccer practice or they'll miss these things because those things in their brain literally cost money. right?
Yeah.
Whether not making
And you feel
it
like maybe there'll
or
be more of them, but you can't sacrifice the work
exactly,
pressure because the work pressure is so
exactly.
urgent, and there'll be another recital. You can rationalize a lot of things. I mean, I did it myself for many
Hmm.
years in a similar situation. I had a funny one where, soccer is my sport of choice. And I had convinced my friends to shift the league that we played in to be like right downtown near the building, and to
Right.
play games that started at like 11 p.m. at night. And it wasn't convenient for anyone else. And somehow I managed to convince them, grateful for that. And they would be messaging me at like 10:15, 10:30. So are you
Are you
in?
coming?
Like, are you coming? And I'd be like, well, who knows? Like, there's still 30 minutes between now and then,
Something
and it's a
might come up.
10-minute cab ride. Yeah, like things are coming up. I'm working. We don't know yet. And I was getting so annoyed at them for feeling like they were pestering me. And
Right.
at some point, I had to say to myself, like, are they pestering you, or did they shift an entire social thing to be near you at a time you needed so it was more convenient, so you might show up and you won't even commit to
Hmm.
it 20 minutes beforehand?
Right.
So I definitely feel that frustration and that confusion because your logic has shifted. And so it's very, very painful because you're trying to like relearn, you're trying to
Right.
relearn what you feel like your standard is.
Yeah. Yes. It grabs you without you realizing that it's. I mean, it infects your operating system, right? Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, I came out of the illness not wanting to do that again, right? Trying, everything in my power to stay away from that world. Um, but I also had my wife there saying, "Could you please make some money?" And so there was, a sort of there was about a 2 or 3 week period where I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I was thinking maybe I'll just go to a mid-sized firm as of counsel, and not have the pressure of the hours or,
Right.
something like that.
Right.
Um, but, I suggested to Audra that maybe I'll just open my own firm.
Wow.
And she said,
That's a brave thing to do.
right. And God love her, she said, but you don't know what the hell you're doing. And I said, you are right. I don't know what I'm doing. Um, but she said, look, you've got a year, right? If you can turn a profit within a year, that's great, right? If not, then we'll have the conversation again and we'll see what's going on. So I've been really blessed with with a partner who is willing to take chances on me, right? And
Yeah.
knowing that I didn't have any idea what I was doing, still said, yeah, give it a go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful to have that kind of support so close to you. And so I'm thinking about this. Like you clearly had a lot of experience with like you had a sense of like who you are, and you tried it in personal pursuits and a little bit in your career. Your body kind of voted with its own feet, saying like, "Hey, if you're not going to figure out that this isn't the right environment for you, I'm going to show you." And
Mm-hmm.
you come out of it and you decide, like, maybe almost out of default or in reaction to that pain, like, I'm going to do my own thing. And so, whether it's seed counsel or purely estates or, all the ventures that you've kind of had before and until now, like, how do you think about constructing your career and your life to like maximize your natural gifts? Like, how do you bring it into your career so that you feel happier and you feel the success from it?
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of pieces that go into that. Before I do that, though, just for everybody, your body is smarter than your brain. If your body tells you something and your brain says something else, please listen to your body. Um, anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
part of the way that I think about my businesses is they're projects. They're not something that lasts forever, right?
Hmm.
I love that DARPA, the American Defense, like advanced research
Yeah.
stuff. Nobody in that program is allowed to hold a position for more than 3 years, right? And the idea
Wow.
is it needs to be constantly changing and evolving, right? And so I have adopted for myself something along the lines of every 2 years, I either have to recommit to something or shut it down.
Wow.
and it's
That's
and
cool.
it's just as good to it's just as good to shut it down as it is to recommit to it, right? It's as is this working for me now, right? And a lot of what that does is it allows me to not get so
Right.
attached to things, right? Nothing is as precious, as trying to, build something that's going to last with my name on it, forever. Um, and so what that
It's
allows
like
me
an
to
active
do is,
choice. You're making like a much more intentional active choice.
yeah, exactly. And what it allows me to do is
Yeah.
to, you know, build on the things that I find to be interesting. It allows me to go try something, right? Without thinking of it in terms of, well, if this doesn't work, I'm done, right? Um,
Right.
it gives a lot of freedom and play to the way that I build things. Um,
That probably
the
speaks well to like your nature too, like the
Mhm.
freedom, the creativity, the experience, the testing. Like this is kind of like the musician Owen and the brief sneaking the jokes into the brief Owen, like where you can keep
Right.
testing things. I get this, man, because I hear this a lot about like my consulting and coaching. People are always asking me like, okay, so how are you going to scale this thing to be like 10x what
Mhm.
it is? And what I keep telling them is like, I'm not worried about trying to scale a thing that it is today. What
Right.
I care about the most is following my natural gifts and the message that I care the most about because it reveals where I'm meant to go. And
That's it.
whether that's like you said, stopping something or building something brand new or recommitting to what you've got, I've just never really grabbed onto this feeling that you have to take what you have now and figure out a way to make 10x the widgets. It's just at least not inspiring to me. What's much more inspiring is like always getting closer to what you're about.
Mhm. Yeah,
And you
100%.
seem to be doing that, my friend. Like how do you do so you've got seed counsel, so you're helping startups from,
Mhm.
the legal side, which is beautiful. You've got the estates business. You've also got the writing, right? Where you infuse your writing with the music and really it's like thoughtful lessons about building a career and taking care of
Mhm.
your business and growing it the way that makes sense for you. How did you find the way to like fold these all together such that you're paying kind of the right amount of attention to each of them because you have so many interesting pursuits going on at the same time?
Yeah, the answer is I'm not sure that I have found the right mixture of it. I am following the things that I am naturally wanting to do, right? Um, you know, on the record, it simply came about because every Saturday morning I listen to a record. And, I wrote about it once and it got a lot of response. I was like, okay, cool. I mean, I can write about this. Um, and it
Right.
evolved into, writing about music um, as a trapdoor to getting people to listen to me talk about business, right? Or life. Because yeah, I mean, each of those I do talk about a record and I talk about, the musicians and stuff like that, but it's only sort of about that, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and finding the balance between, you know, the writing on the record, the novel that I'm writing, um, seed council, and the estate work, you know, um, there are weeks where I nail it, and there are weeks where I starve one of them. Right. Um, I'm still working on it. Right. But I mean, that's kind of the idea. You know,
Maybe it's
tr-
intermittent fasting.
right, right. And I, I have a good friend named Eva Ford who loves to. She's very good at creating community, but the way that she schedules meetings are, what she does is she doesn't at the end of a meeting then say, okay, here's when we're going to meet next, right? She says, when one of you feels like you miss us, let me know and I'll schedule a meeting.
That's cool.
Right. And I love that because it sets a natural cadence to things as opposed to we're going to meet every 2 weeks, and then after 2 months of it you're like, this is too much. I mean, I like you guys, I don't like you that much.
Yeah. Becomes an
you know
obligation instead of a choice.
exactly, right? It becomes something where you are, you know, involving yourself because you really want to be there. Um, and there are aspects of both of my firms that I am looking to get better at, right? To automate a little bit better, or to get certain, you know, marketing stuff nailed down so that I don't have to work as hard at it, right? But at the same time, you know, I make enough to pay my mortgage, right? Uh, I eat. Um, I don't need to be making $1 million a year. Um, at some point, would I turn it down? No, probably not. But I don't think it would change the way I live my life anyway. So, the things that get
Yeah.
me up in the morning are exercising my brain and moving my body, and the kind of things that you know I can I can do without you know 10xing my business. To your point, right?
And you know what? It also, your personal gifts of like the writing, the thoughtfulness, the humor, it actually supports your business too. Because,
Mhm.
like I was so drawn into your writing and the way that you push us to think harder and how funny you are, that like I know that you're supporting the startup scene, in Pittsburgh, and I know you're on the estates business. And so when I see folks that like are adjacent or supportive of me, I immediately think of you. And I think this is where like I'm always really encouraging people to look harder inside about their natural gifts, because whether it's a direct correlation of like, I'm amazing musically and I love it and I want to be a musician, or I'm a really creative person, and if I just express my creativity through another channel, people will get to know me.
Right.
And at the end of the day, like whether it's your lawyer, your barber, your interior designer, you prefer to like the people you work with. And you're a nice guy, you're a friendly guy, you're a thoughtful guy. And so when I see people that make sense to work with, who am I going to think of? I think of you. So that's another way for anyone that's listening to be like, well, why should I care about my gifts if I'm a musician and I'm not going to be a professional, in a band? Well, this is another way. And Owen's kind of, you've shown us that, man. And, I wanted to ask you though, is that you're talking about this a little bit. You've had so much, success come from a total success perspective in life and building your businesses. What is something that you're still finding the friction on with, like trusting yourself, trusting your gifts, continuing to push through? What is something that still feels hard for you today?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are certain things that, you know, I actually got. It wasn't an argument so much as a scolding from my wife earlier this week. Um, I say that as lovingly as I possibly can because I deserved it. I am really good at taking care of other people, right? If a client comes to me and has a problem, no matter what it is, if it involves forensic accounting, I can do that, right? I'm not so good at doing that myself, right? And so, you know, she was like, Owen, you still need to pay your local taxes for 2022. I was like, oh yeah. She's like, could you do that? I was like, I mean, I suppose that I could. She was like, do it today. So
Right.
there
Right.
are like very basic everyday aspects of life that I'm not very good at for myself. And
Right.
one of the things that I've been wanting to improve on is being a little bit more selfish as far as taking care of myself, right? I I put a ton of time and effort and love into the people that I work with, and sometimes I don't take
Right.
care of myself well enough.
That's a beautiful message, man. And you know what? That kind of goes perfectly to how I want to end each episode here, which is like if you could give some advice to everyone that's listening, but also even to like your younger self, like maybe even today's Owen, like what is the advice that you would give yourself about using what you've got in there to take care of you, to take care of your community? Like what have you kind of learned over this arc?
Yeah, one of the things that I have that I wish I would have understood earlier, right, is the things that I care about and the things that are meaningful to me are important not only to your point earlier, um, if I become associated with certain things because I am out on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever talking about things, right? That's all well and good, but it also attracts the kind of people that I want to work with, right? Um,
Right.
the goal, not just in business, but in life in general, is to find your people. Um, and in order to find your people, you kind of have to know who you are and who you like to hang out with, and that is
Mhm.
directly drawn from the things that you care about, the things that you enjoy
Right.
doing, the things that you just naturally find yourself doing, whether or not you intend to be doing them. Um, and it's not just good to have hobbies, right? Or to find certain things that you enjoy doing, whether it's fly fishing or playing guitar. That helps you understand a little bit better the kind of people that you want to be around, right? And the kind of people I love to be around aren't necessarily
Mhm.
people who are just like me, right? My best friends are chemists and
Right.
data analysts, but there are people who really, really care about learning and figuring things out and being creative in whatever they're doing, right? Getting a sense of that
Right.
and following it is good, not just for business, but it is very good for business. It's also good for, finding your own people and being comfortable just on a day-to-day basis, knowing that, the people around you care.
Yeah, that's a lesson it took me a long time to learn, is to shift from looking at the actions or the activities to understanding why people choose to do certain things that they do. What do they value underneath it? And like you said about your friends, like there's a curiosity, there's a learning, there's a creativity, and whether that's chemistry or music or the law or whatever it is, those things are just kind of outcomes or paths of the values. And when you
Right.
find people that share those values, you feel like bonded to them. You feel like you belong with them. You're not just like fitting in with them. And I think that that's always the big difference, because that really helps you feel safer and more encouraged to know
Mhm.
what you're about instead of just trying to fit into an activity.
That's
And,
right.
oh, and I just want to tell you, man, like you make people feel like they belong here. When I read it, I don't, I'm not kidding when I say that. I read it every weekend when you put it out. I'm there. It stays unread until I read it, because I know you're going to help me, think through my own journey that I'm going through with creativity. We share some bonds over music. I ping you too much about Bon Iver and my thoughts about the
No, no.
lyrics and what they might mean. And that's what you do, man.
It's all good. It's all good. And thank you for reading on the record. Sometimes when I put it out, it feels like it goes into a void, right? I mean, I kind of know people are reading it, but I don't know.
Of course, man. That feels like everything that we put out into the world, right? It's a vulnerability piece where it's like you've given over control of it. And you told me about writing music once, that once you put it out into the world, now it can be somebody else's, and you got to make
Mhm.
peace with that. I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah.
So, listen, man, I just wanted to thank you and everyone that's listening for joining us. I love learning about your journey, and everyone who's kind of like reflecting to try to find what their natural gifts are and how they use them, and because it never ends. Like it's always an evolution. And I think, you sharing your journey is another example of what might resonate for someone else. And so that's what we're going to do here. That's what we're going to build, is compiling all these different journeys of how people have discovered their gifts, brought them into their life, even when it felt really hard to do that. And so, wherever you are listening to this, at home, at lunch with your friends, I hope that, you're taking inspiration and ideas from Owen, so that, you can uncover what you're about. And if you think somebody would benefit from this, then I hope that you share it with them. So thank you so much for listening. Owen, thank you. And to everyone out there, wish you an incredible rest of your day.